Hello YouTube, this is Hurl Guru. I am a Lemurian light worker, fascinated by psychology and how the universe works. And I will today explain to you one of the thoughts I had about lately that some narcissists aren't narcissists yet, but are just alpha tryhards. Just not to say alpha B, because I don't like swearing that much. It does negative energy on me. But one novel thought I had about the narc psychology or narcology, not drugs, narcissists, that is that there's some obscure question that lies within. And here, my cat Abby is just right beside me, and she's going to listen to me, of course, but she's clingy as hell, so so whether you have a narcissist or an alpha scum is it can sometimes be a tough question because they have very similar behaviors that you could even take the DSM, stripe out the NPD, write alpha scum above just to replace it. Although I'm not very trusting of the DSM, etc., because psychology is too complicated to even go into like some money laundering machine that diagnoses people because it's ruined me before. So I'm going to try to explain it in my own way. Well, a narcissist's difference with an alpha scumbag is that narcissists don't really show it. They only show it in private. Some do it in public, but it's people generally are very blind to it because they almost act like non-narcissists in public, and they manipulate people to like them in ways that are a little different than alpha scumbags. They're more sneaky, and they try to look good. They know how what they have to do to look good, and they are far more robotic. They don't have as much character or empathy as someone who's an alpha scumbag. But yeah, so here you go. Is that an alpha scumbag generally will be a some kind of stereotypical personality that isn't necessarily pathological, but it's more of a temporary phase that often appears in early adulthood or adolescence or so, and it will affiliate with insensitive people that have big egos, but because it's such a secondary influence on them, and that it's really societal instead of their own family, and that it comes a lot later than just triggers of narcissistic pathology and becoming. It's not necessarily the same thing as a true narcissist because an alpha scumbag can love to brag about themselves being alpha, or they can romanticize everything, and they aren't as malicious as narcissists because they're still human inside. They feel like they have something, but at the same time, it's hard for them to shape their own true identity because they may have been hurt in the past, and it's their way to accommodate, have tough skin, instead of going, "Oh, I'm such a child, I'm jealous." Because when you have an alpha, they love being the adult, they love being the mature one, but at the same time, they're pretty mature for their own self-proclaimed maturity. Except that, you're going to see them drink booze, flex in front of people, put all sorts of stuff on social media. Look at me doing this. Look at me doing that. I got new chicks. I got new that. I got new Gucci, etc. But it's temporary. It's not a permanent phase. They know more than a narcissist about themselves. A narcissist has a lot of different types of being. Sorry for the interruption. Someone turned my anyway. So a narcissist is very envious. They're so envious that they don't know who they are anymore because they're blind by envy, or they think people envy them. And just by saying this word, I feel like a toxic energy around me. So when a narcissist acts or behaves like they do typically, they never break character. They never ever break character. They just act the narcissist, the little narky they are, all the time, and they have extra social habits that you don't always see in scumbags. For example, you see scumbags just being overall, like they they can be masters of subtlety, but also they're very loud. They are a bit adolescent-like. They can be womanizers if they're a woman, like whatever gender. They just can be outright discriminatory, and it's can be certain and trigger some sort of shock versus everyone thing. And they can be very self-centered. They can have too much self-confidence, so much self-confidence, but inside it's a little weak, spineless body self inside, and because it's so temporary, it may last years, but still temporary because they haven't developed fully yet. But a narcissist has developed fully because and they can't really change. But they haven't developed fully at all because inside they're still little children. I don't know that far into the difference between an alpha scumbag and a true narcissist. But when you compare them together, you put them up two together, the alpha scumbags will often be the golden child or sometimes even the scapegoat, trying to just rebuild themselves in a misguided way. Or they could have a non-abusive family, just a family that's a little misoriented or maladaptive, but not as extreme. And it's a lot of cultural influence too. Narcissists, they will reenact scripts T to the word, but the scumbag, there's still a bit of themselves inside of them. And they're probably a milder, much milder form of narcissist, but they can appear as narcissistic very often. Maybe even an overt one, but there's still some gray area between what a narcissist is and what an alpha, just someone who's just an alpha scumbag is. An alpha scumbag can be like even 16 or 15-year-old. They can, it's just those little kids that don't know, that haven't got their wisdom yet. They've lived in often the hood or just are very jockey types of persons that have mediocre education or no, I'm not going too far into stereotypes. I'm just stating examples, but I don't know everybody on the planet, so of course I might be biased sometimes. But yeah, so a narcissist has much more than an alpha scumbag because it's easy to see who an alpha scumbag is inside. There's still a slim chance of seeing them change overall after trauma. But the narcissist, even after trauma, they just might have leakage more, but they won't really change. It's very rare. People who are narcissistic but realize that they have to improve is quite rare, to be honest, because a narc is just really possessed. Let's just say metaphorically, because some people will just say, no, you can't just say someone who's mentally ill is possessed. That's not right and moral. But it's just my term for it. It's hard to describe just the intensity. It's hard to describe as something else. And when you say a narcissist is just an alpha scumbag, it's outright wrong. It's not to say wrong, but it's not obvious because an alpha scumbag is, like I said, temporary, and they are not as clever, or should I say, as a narcissist. But a narcissist can be even less clever than that, or more clever. They can be sometimes far more clever because narcissists have an advanced state of reactive attachment disorder, whilst an alpha is just someone who's been misguided into pour into some corner of culture, makes them make themselves think they're superior. They love to brag about it, and everyone knows that it's an alpha scumbag. They get chicks, they get high school points, they get all sort of social points. They're just an insecure little guy. It's not an actual narcissist, that's what I say, because narcissists, they're the more extreme form of spiritual death. Whereas an alpha scumbag is just some very insecure big guy who has yet to experiment with who they are, and they might change. There's a good. They still have some empathy left, and even guilt. But narcissists feel a lot of shame and guilt, but they just deny it. They just outright deny it. And also, scumbag won't always deny things, although they may have similar behavior to actual overt narcissists. It's not as pathological or extreme unless it becomes that. and unless there is a long history of narcissistic factors and it reinforces in childhood and even early childhood. Some children would rather develop NPD when they grow up, and for many narcissists that is the case. But there's a lot of moral area between their alpha cousin and a true narky. It's obvious to see the difference once because with a narc it's hard to diagnose them because you have to experience with having a relationship with one. But an alpha scumbag is just easily recognizable on the go, and people generally no, they you know that stereotype when they just go cry for their mommy when they have pants pulled down from everyone by the big nerd, just saying. But like I said, a jock isn't always an alpha scumbag, and an alpha scumbag isn't always a narcissist. And I think there's the real connection. A narcissist isn't always an alpha scumbag, and not alpha scumbags are narcissists. Some can act as both, but not all of them are exclusively one. You know, and it's way harder to spot an arc, especially when they're covert. But when they're overt, it can overlap in some area, but the biggest variables that can define whether or not it's an actual narc is the history, the pattern, and the very predictable compared little habits they have with other narcs. Then when you have someone who's just an alpha scumbag, they're not necessarily there entirely. It's much more of a phase, and especially the empathy. There's way more empathy in an alpha scumbag, just someone who's not a narc but an alpha scumbag, than a narc. You know, a lot more. But once you experience with a narc, you will actually see it. You know, and how an alpha scumbag manipulates. They don't. I don't think they often think about manipulating. They might do drugs. They might lie because of that, but there's still some humanity. There is some they still have their humanity. Just that they're a little immature, you know. And I think that's the biggest difference. And that's my personal opinion. I'm not objectifying it. It's just like how I put it down, and I'm open to just how people think the real difference is. If some people think it's the same, if others think it's totally different, has no link whatsoever, or just any kind of link or perception you can make. And that's my perspective on it. Feel free to debate. And like I said, I just study a lot of narcissistic behavior, mental illness, and all. But well, yeah, I agree that narcissism is more of a spiritual illness than a mental one, because mental illness is more like bipolar, or just someone who's developed like depression. But a morbidly purely spiritual one might have to be something like narcissism, because that's how I see it. I will explain the rest in other videos, but that's how I see it. And the biggest thing also is that you have to be careful when around someone who displays any kind of, I think myself, as holier than thou behavior, because you obviously get hurt if you're not like them, or even if you like them, but you won't even know. You think it feels good because you learn to love pain. You think pain is good. Pain is like love. Love is like pain, or etc. Everything becomes reversed. But here we go. That's just my true opinion on it, and I think that's enough information. So I'm not over teaching people yet, but here.